Modeling data relationships is one of the single most important concerns for an app developer. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to build a 5-star review system from scratch using the new Firestore document database and Angular. My goal is to give you a good foundation for building many-to-many relationships in a NoSQL backend environment. The reason I chose a 5-star review system for this episode is because the underlying concepts can be applied to many different features such as Facebook likes, Reddit votes, Instagram hearts, and many other concepts similar to those. One of the most important best practices with Firestore is to create big collections and small documents. To build this feature, we're going to have 3 collections in the root of the database. So this first collection is a user's collection, and the only attribute on the document itself is the display name. I won't have time to cover user authentication in this video, but if you're new to my channel, make sure to check out my previous Firestore OAuth video to get up to speed on that. So back to the database, our primary goal here is to create a relationship between users and movies through the stars collection. So if you look at our movies document, it just has the image, title, and plot of the movie. If we jump over to the stars collection, you'll see that's where all the relational data is kept. Each star document will save the movie ID as well as the user ID and the value of the rating. And then because the user can only post one review for each movie, I've also created a custom ID here to ensure that there's no accidental data duplication. So we create the document ID by concatenating the movie ID to the user ID separated by an underscore, and you'll see this more once we get into Angular. If you come from a SQL background, this is very similar to a many-to-many through relationship. So now I'm jumping into my Angular project. I'm assuming you have Angular Fire 2 version 5 installed. What I'm going to be doing today is creating a very generic middleman service that can connect relationships between any 2 documents. To focus on the relationship aspect of this feature, I'm going to just hard code a user document and movie document directly in the app component. So I'll set up a variable for the user document and movie document, which are both Angular Firestore document types, and then we'll also set another variable for the user and the movie as an observable. Then during ng-on-init, we'll go ahead and load the documents. So in this case, I'm just going to hard code a user ID in here, but in the real world, you would get this from an auth service or some other auth mechanism. And I'll do the exact same thing for a movie document, but I'd like to point out that these 2 documents never contain any information about the other party. It's all handled through the middleman star document that we're going to create later. Then to turn these references into observables, we call value changes on each of the documents. We can get the movie ID or user ID on the Angular Fire document itself. So we can set up a getter here, and then on the Angular Firestore document, we can call ref ID. More than anything, setting up the getter just helps clean up the code once we get to the HTML. So inside the app component HTML, I'm going to unwrap the movies observable. And I do that by just calling movie async and then set it as a template variable of m. With that, we can display a title and display the image URL as well as the movie plot. Then we'll come back to this later after we create the star review component. But before we do that, we're first going to build our service. So run ng-generate service star and make sure to specify the app module. The goal of our service is to communicate with Firestore to build that middle relationship in the star collection. So after importing Angular Firestore, I'm going to create an interface here just to reinforce what a star is. So a star is just going to be the user ID, movie ID, and then a value for the star, which ranges from 0.5 to 5. From there, we can add Angular Firestore to the constructor. With that done, I want to show you why I have stars as a root collection and not a sub-collection under users or movies. So let's say we wanted to get all of the movies that a user has starred. We could do that by calling collection stars, then use the query callback with where to filter them by the user ID. Firestore will automatically index by the user ID, so this will be a fast query even if it's a massive collection. And then in this case here, we want to return the observable of this query, so we just call value changes on it. Now, the reason it's a root collection is because we want to query stars by their movie ID as well. So we can do the exact same thing, just switching out the user ID for the movie ID. If stars were nested as a subcollection, we'd be able to make one of these queries, but not both of them. The last thing we need from our service is to set the actual relationship. So we'll create a method here that takes a user ID, movie ID, and value of the star review. So we'll go ahead and set that to a JavaScript object typed to our star interface. Then we can use this data to also create a custom ID for our document. So I'm going to set that up as user ID underscore movie ID. This technique will ensure that you don't have any data duplication, assuming you have unique user IDs and movie IDs. It also provides a quick way to query a star document if you already have a movie ID and user ID somewhere else in your code. So the only thing left to do is make a reference to this path and then call set with the star data. That's all we need for now, but you might also want to add a delete method if you want users to be able to remove their past stars. That's it for the service. Now we can move on to the star review component. So after it's been generated, let's go ahead and first add it to the app component. So we're going to pass it a movie ID and a user ID from the parent component. If you want to learn more about this, check out my sharing data with components video. But all we're doing here is passing the movie ID and user ID strings from the parent to the child. And we'll set that up with the input decorator here in the TypeScript in just a second. Inside the star review TypeScript, we'll go ahead and import the service as well as the input decorator from Angular core. Then we can declare our user ID and movie ID variables with the decorator. This just tells Angular to allow these variables to be passed in directly through the HTML. Before we go any further, let's look a little closer at how this app works. So we have a current user here on the left, and then a movie on the right. And if a movie has no reviews, it just says not reviewed here. The user can then hover over the stars, and when they click it, it will actually update the data in Firebase, and it will also calculate the average rating among all users that have starred this movie. So the next step will be to set up a variable for the stars observable. Then I'm going to set a separate observable for the average rating. Then we can use our star service during ng on init to retrieve the actual observable list. So in this case, we want to show all of the movie stars, so we just call get movie stars with the movie ID. Then we can use the RxJS map operator to break this down into an average rating. After calling map, we're going to have an observable array of objects. So first we'll map these objects down to just their number values. In other words, the value that users have rated them. And then with that array of numbers, we can then reduce it down to its average. This code might look kind of ugly, but this is the standard way that you would get the average of an array in plain JavaScript. And if that array is empty, we're just going to say not reviewed. That takes care of the observables, but now we need an event handler that will update Firestore when the user clicks on the star icon. So we already have the method set up in the service, so we just have to pass the event handler a value, and then it will use the user ID, movie ID, and that value to update Firestore. So let's jump over to the HTML and put this all together. So for the average rating, we can just call async, and we're good to go. It's already been mapped down to the value that we want. To show other users that have starred a movie, we can loop over the star observable with the async pipe, and then just display some data about that particular star. So we'll say this user ID gave this movie X amount of stars. So now we can actually build that form where the user updates their star rating. A lot of this is CSS that I'm not going to cover, but you can get the full code at the lesson link in the description. So we set up an ng container here, which basically allows you to loop over something without affecting the DOM. In this case, I'm just going to loop over the integers of 5 through 1. I set up this loop so we only have to create 2 input fields rather than 10. So the first input is going to represent a full star. So what we can do is pass the number down to our star handler. So if the user clicks the 5th star, it'll send a 5-star review up to Firestore. And then we need to set up an ID, which is different for each one. So we'll just say star plus whatever number we're looping over. And these are just HTML radio buttons with some fancy CSS styling. Each input also has a label, and it's important that the for attribute matches the ID on the input exactly. To create a half star, we can duplicate this process. We just have to subtract 0.5 from each number. So when we call the star handler, we'll subtract 0.5. Then we also have different CSS styles on the half star, so that's why we have them separated as 2 different inputs like this. The CSS to make this look good on the front end is actually based on a code pin, so I'll have a link for that in the description, and you can also get the full code at angularfirebase.com. So if we check it out on the front end, you can see we have the movie here with just one average rating of 2.5. If we had another 5-star rating, that average changes in real time to 3.75. Then if we go ahead and add another review, this time with Firestore pulled up, you can see that the values are being saved in the backend in real time as well. That's it for star ratings with Angular and Firestore. If this video helped you, please like and subscribe. And if you want to take your app to the next level with exclusive pro content, consider becoming a pro member at angularfirebase.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.